Canada's foreign affairs and finance ministers will head to Mexico tomorrow for trade talks. The visit by Anita Anand and François-Philippe Champagne comes just days after the two countries failed to reach trade deals with the U.S. CBC's Peter Armstrong tells us what the ministers hope to achieve from this meeting.
It's an interesting sort of tact, right? Because on the one hand, I think they have a lot of notes to compare with Mexico, in that Canada and Mexico are really a study in contrasts, right? In their approach to this trade war, Mexico has kept a decidedly low profile. Mexico did not respond with any retaliatory measures or tariffs of its own. Mexico has just tried to sort of stay out of the spotlight, as it were. Canada, on the other hand, did respond with retaliatory tariffs, has engaged more with the U.S. And for a stretch there, it looked like it was, sort of paying off for the Canadians, or at least that it wasn't being too punishing for the Canadians. But as of Friday, the Mexicans have a better deal than Canada does. Their exemption, their pause on that increase in new tariffs is allowing them to have more access to the American market tariff-free than Canada gets. So I think there's an ability for the two sides to sit down and talk through what they've learned from managing this trade war in two very different ways. And then the other, of course, is we talk a lot about diversifying the Canadian economy. We talk a lot about that in the context of opening up the Canadian economy rather than having 13 economies, having one. Well, there's 200 million people in Mexico, and it's a huge economy, and we trade like $56 billion worth of goods with Mexico every year, just a fraction of what we trade with the United States. And so there's an opportunity there to open up a lot of those lines of communication and lines of commerce at the same time.
Peter, there was a time when the three countries, Canada, U.S., and Mexico, were good buddies, the three amigos. That is, things have changed dramatically. Where do trade relations stand now? Yeah, listen,
I think I think that's fair to say that they were good buddies in the three amigos. I think there's always been strife. I think there's always been complications in that tripartite relationship between the three countries. I think there is goodwill in both Mexico City and in Ottawa to try to come up with a way of working more closely together, both, as I say, in terms of commerce and in terms of their messaging. That relationship works at its best when the American economy is outsized compared to both Canada and Mexico. Take a listen here to what François-Philippe Champagne has to say about what they're going to try to do, and then I can sum up what I think he's actually trying to say here. Take a listen.
If you look at the USMCA as a trading bloc, that's the second largest trading bloc in the world. So it is important for us to engage with our Mexican friends. And so the meetings will be constructive in that respect, looking at markets, looking at diversification, looking at strengthening our partnership with our Mexican colleagues.
I think what he's saying there is it's good for Mexico, it's good for Canada, but it's also good for the United States if they can keep CUSMA, or whatever we're calling the Canada-U.S.-Mexico Free Trade Agreement these days, if they can keep that intact. And I think that's going to be job number one of this trade mission down there.
That's CBC's Peter Armstrong in Washington. Let's talk a little more about this story. José Díaz-Briseño is the correspondent for the leading Mexican newspaper Reforma. And José joins us from Washington. José, thanks for your time. It's good to get your perspective on this.
Yes, I would say that from the beginning, it was clear that there are no rules in how to deal with this White House. But Mexico learned early on that appeasement was much more, convenient with Donald Trump at the top of the presidency. From the very beginning, the Mexican government approach to this negotiation as not solely one devoted to trade. And for example, it extradited 29 cartel figures to the United States. This was some kind of kowtow present to Trump in order to, get goodwill from the administration in the trade talks. So perhaps that's something that the Canadians would like to get from their exchanges with President Sheinbaum and their ministers, being much more pragmatic.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you touch on this, a very different approach that Canada has taken to dealing with the White House than what we have seen from Mexico. I'm wondering, what do you think is going to be up for discussion when the two Canadian ministers travel to Mexico? Are they going to be talking about the bilateral trade relationship? Might there be discussions, do you imagine, about how best to deal with Trump, comparing notes?
Certainly, there will be a comparison of notes, but I would stress that the Canadian negotiators dealing with the Trump administration are, to my knowledge, not traveling to Mexico City. Neither Mr. LeBlanc or the Canadian ambassador to Washington, who are the ones heading the negotiation with the Trump officials here in Washington, are a part of the travel pool to Mexico City. So I imagine that the things that will be discussed in Mexico City will be much more of a general nature. And also, let's not forget, there are some irritants to the Canadian-Mexican relationship that for sure will be addressed here. Just I want to mention that Prime Minister Carney expressed some goodwill to Mexico by inviting Claudia Sheinbaum to this G7 summit in Alberta a couple of weeks ago.
No, you're quite right that sending the finance minister from Canada, the foreign affairs minister from Canada, those are two individuals who are not involved in the trade talks with Donald Trump. Is that perhaps strategic, do you think?
I think that's certainly expected because both governments, the Canadian and the Mexican administrations, are at the very early stages of the governing period, and it's actually encouraging to see striking this approach towards Mexico. I must say that the current Mexican government, in general, has been very, rejecting international cooperation. And the fact that Canada is extending a hand to reach out and try to at least compare notes, it's a very good sign. Let's remember that the Mexican government has a specific strength that the Canadian government doesn't have. It is a very compact and very, dominating coalition internally. President Sheinbaum has 75% of approval, and it has control of both branches, the legislature and the executive, and it's already passing also some controversial reforms at the judicial level that I'm sure the Canadians will be pointing out.
Jose, let me ask you, the issue of trade with the United States, the White House tariff regime, how does that resonate in Mexico? I think you probably know that in Canada, it's a very big deal. Many Canadians feel very passionately about this. The whole slogan, elbows up, fight against this trade, the trade war with the United States. Is it playing out like that in Mexico with the public, or is it different?
I think we learned this in Mexico City from the first Trump presidency. Remember, in the first campaign in 2015, 2016 of Trump going for the White House, Mexico was at the center of the controversy and debates all along the campaign trail. This time around, it was Canada. And at this moment, the trade file in Mexico News, it's not necessarily front and center. It is one of the most important, but it's normally the third or fourth in the news. Meanwhile, for Canada, this is certainly front and center, and perhaps that's something that pushes the public for Canada in a whole different level that it makes the Mexican public. I would say that Mexican exporters are certainly very worried about the whole uncertainty, and I'm sure that both the private sectors of both nations will be part of the discussions in Mexico City this week.
José Díaz-Briseño in our Washington studio, thank you so much for your time.